Welcome to another episode of the Leaderonomics Show. I'm here with Dr. Karuna Ramanathan, an expert on change, transition, and now I think the new space of AI and new technologies, right? Dr. Karuna, very welcome to the show. Glad to have you with us. Tell us how you got into this space. How did you transition into becoming a person that helps people change and enables organization to transition successfully into new spaces or new eras or new sort of ventures?
Roshan and Leaderonomics, thank you for the invite. And it's actually quite daunting still to be called expert. I mean, the term expert triggers all kinds of imagery. I think there are no such thing, there are no such people who are called experts anymore. And that's really the era we're in right now. So going back to your question, I mean, I've been working for 42 years and I've always been intrigued by how people actually deal with difficult things. And that background started in the Navy. And after about 20 years in the Navy, and I actually got the privilege of commanding 2 warships, I then realized just how humbling it can be when you actually have to pretend at some point in time that you know a hell of a lot about some things, and then some things, actually most things you don't know.
Sure.
And so then you start to trust yourself in what you don't know, and then you start to exercise some level of curiosity, and that's how I guess it all started. And after that, I had 10 years or a decade of work experimenting with leadership in the military, and those were the heydays where we were actually starting to do some serious diagnosis on culture and how to shift culture. And the military is not just a one-track organization, so it's a lot of transformation that took place there. And after that, and that was like a solid 30 years in the military, I actually moved on to government for about 3 years, and I started doing some high-level work with government leaders in Singapore as to helping them with the leadership conversations and getting people working across the government to actually find mutually progressive areas where we could implement things faster. And then for the last 8 years or 9 years, I set up KR Consulting, and we've been doing this pretty much for clients who are really interested in accelerating transformation work. And if you know and you of all, Leaderonomics is very well clued into this. In the last 8 years or so, even before we had the pandemic, I think the digital transformation really came to life somewhere in 2015, 2016. And then the digital agenda came to life. And then we started to deal with a whole host of issues as companies started to seek to grow in these areas, fueled by the e-commerce boom and all that. But for ordinary organizations, that became quite a bit of a challenge. So we got involved in the change work, and we don't do strategy. Till today, I keep saying that we don't do strategy. Our team, we pick up from where you want to start, and we start working it with and in through people. So we do the execution layer, and in the execution layer, you actually find the old terms like resistance and mindset and a whole host of other issues associated with change. So that's how we actually got started. Today, it has gone from 4.0 to 5.0. It's gone from blockchain, big data into big areas like cloud, now generative AI, augmented reality. And I was just sharing earlier with you in a conversation we had, we still maintain that I think the pace of change far outweighs our ability to adapt to it on our own merit, and that's really where the change agenda is right now, Rishabh.
And if you look at throughout your history, whether it's in Singapore, like the government, or in the organizations in Singapore and around the world that you've helped, were there I'm sure. I mean, there were a lot of successes you had. What was some of the drivers, the key things, either the obstacles to that change or the things that you had to tweak to make those things happen, the change becomes successful?
Well, if you take traditional models where we all schooled in, like Kotter's model, where you look at, building a coalition, you're looking at communicating over communicating. I think those well-intended models are already by themselves dated. If you ask me to nail it down, we don't take work unless we believe that the leaders are actually committed to the change. And it's very easy to say that, but it's very difficult to diagnose that. Now, and here's the other algorithm that we use. The more intense the transformation agenda or the pace, the more collective the leaders will probably have to be to rally themselves around a common narrative. So that's really probably something that's quite uniform across. So the reality is unfortunately the other way around. What you get is leaders saying yes and agreeing to the change, but not necessarily accepting it. Now, we don't see that so much in commercial organizations for profit, because I think the profit agenda is still the growth, the profit agenda, the bottom line. These are all very, very important markers and drivers of how an organization needs to survive and flourish. But we do see it in some quasi-government or government or even NGOs where idealism or, some some other major cultural frame sits in, and that's where change becomes difficult. In my book, 3 years ago, I said that one of the most difficult areas for change work, at least with execution, is actually in government-linked organizations where there seems to be a lot of the word contentment might be too harsh a word, but there seems to be a state of accepting things as it is, and this is where it's counter innovation. So the major driver, leadership, good indicator, profit or growth, and the commitment to it in terms of the urgency has to be the necessity to change things as you go, and innovation ultimately comes into play.
And a lot of the work that you do, and as we're reading some of it, is about adaptability, right? How do and the guys that adapt will ultimately succeed. And it's the same with the dinosaurs. Not maybe adapt and they're gone. And us as humans, we've constantly evolved and adapted to situations. And so as you move from our 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, now you're talking about 5. Organizations are struggling to adapt, and that's where you come in and help in terms of this adaptability. How? I mean, I know you talked about working with the CEO, the leadership team to make sure there's that intensity and so on and so forth. But what are some of the other drivers that mark out companies that will ultimately adapt and be successful, and those that don't?
Okay, we have started promoting the idea of the concept of the middle core. And this starts off McKinsey's work, which actually went on, I think, in 2017. And McKinsey said middle managers are understated a lot. In fact, I think the book was last year, Power to the Middle. And basically, the concept is a simple one. Execution is often not driven from the top. It seems like it is, but for it to succeed, as in transformation, execution has to be generated from the middle. So we call this the middle core. Are they just middle managers? Probably too small a group. Now we're looking at project managers, team leaders, supervisors, for that matter, even newly joined graduates. So Roshan, and I'm a little older than you, I think. And years ago when we joined, we were given
a lot more.
Yeah, but you can do a lot of stuff with your hair these days. So you have 6 months, maybe 9 months to find your feet when you enter an organization fresh out of school. Sure. These days, I actually joke with clients and CEOs that you probably have 6 to 9 weeks. You're immediately thrown into a complex project. You're part of working for 2 managers. So that middle core is now 30% of an organization's strength. Now, remember that the traditional space for leadership development is the senior leaders and maybe the pipeline. So that's maybe 2, 3, maybe 5% tops. But now you have a 30%. And actually, to that question specific, when you move the middle, you move the transformation. You actually move the middle, right, and the middle moves. So we call these in systems language, while the pace of transformation may be set by the leaders through the strategy and all the good work that they do, the flow is actually in a living system generated by the middle. So we do a lot of work with middles, and we work with thousands of middle managers and project managers and project leaders.
And what specific things that needs to be triggered to this middle core?
Excellent question. So I think the middles are there because the middles are dependable. They're pretty much good at what they do. Sure. The work objectives are clear. The JDs or job descriptions are clear. Now you start facing difficult projects, and difficult projects do not carry with them high degrees of certainty
or clarity.
Maybe 60-70%, yes, but you have an uncomfortable 30%. Left to their own devices, middles would shut that 30% down, as we all would when we are faced with difficulty. So to go to your question, we do 3 things. We kind of generate the middle core, help them become more confident, adaptive, team, and leader. So these are the 3 constructs to calling them adaptive team leaders, which means that this duality that they operate in, on the one hand, I can actually advocate work as a middle, but the second, I can actually collaborate and inquire around the work. And how do you flip between those two? And how do you recognize the situations that would require you to behave in a different way? And we've done that with quite a bit of success in the work that we've done so far, but a lot of that requires a lot of attention at a personal level. So the other point I want to make is the other trend we are seeing is traditional organizational development fields actually have worked on the organization as a whole. We are starting to realize that in transformation, particularly in 4.0, 5.0, Gen AI, you're actually looking at working with each and every individual. It's like personalization strategy to shift yourself. And that's really where I think you're going to find some challenges because not everyone's going to take to it too easily.
But that's such a lot of work, right? I mean, when there's a personalization that happens and you're talking about big organizations to move them, that's a lot of little bits of work that needs to be done, and that, I mean, how is that sort of scaled? I mean, because bigger organizations look at that and say, how do we have a personalized set? Or is that through technology today? Technology allows that personalization to happen.
I'm smiling because it's actually the inspiration for a lot of the work we did was actually Amazon Prime. So I mean, growing up, you'd get a whole list of books to read. You get a book list. You might go to a bookshop and you go and buy all these books and you go home very proudly. But I love to read, right? So I have 10 books sitting in my car, and I said, but today I just go to Amazon Prime and I just type in a topic, and I get directed to a couple of ideas. I might even read some reviews, and then I might say, I'll go for this book. So it's personalized to me. And of course, the algorithm at the back comes churning,
Sure.
and it works that. So I think this is the age that we are in.
Right.
We can build a personalization strategy through technology investments, which is what we are doing.
Okay. And you've embedded that as part of your
Yes.
whole DNA. So using AI and others
That's
to
right.
enable that personalization, that hand holding,
Yes.
but in a way that enables the organization to have alignment and move the culture and structure and so on to adapt to the changes and execute in a way that makes
Spot
sense.
on. But having said that, we put some guardrails in place because we are not great believers in predictive AI for HR. We are not. I mean, I know there are many good people out there who say you can do it. We have kind of held that back. We do a lot of generative work based on knowledge universes that we think we can manage. And I think for that, you can actually crush it down very quickly to point people who are actually, all of us are busy, into spaces where they need to be to focus just that little bit of attention, maybe like an intellectual TikTok thought, where you're there. And then we keep the other part in terms of the technology, in terms of digital platforms, in terms of the guardrails and all those things that we build, and both coexist together.
So a lot of companies are taking a strategy and noticing, saying, hey, when they ask us, hey, give us courses on this new technology, whether it's blockchain or AI or even understanding crypto and some of the other things. But you're saying that there needs to be a sort of interim step.
Yes.
What's that interim step?
There are two things, and this is just an amazing question. One is I need to have, as a learner today, I need to be comfortable enough knowing that if I need to invest 15 minutes or 20 minutes of my leisurely time, serious leisure as a concept, I can be best guided to land on something that's worth reading. And that may not be generative AI at this point because of all the issues around it. I'm sure in time it will all lay down, it will all farm up quite nicely. But for now, it is still maybe knowledge grafting, maybe train models, maybe red dot universes, Basically, we pull in. So for us, we pull in all our consulting knowledge for the last decade, and we pull it all together, and we have guardrailed it. And there are pathways where people can take to actually kind of taxonomized work that they can lay down. But we're looking at digital assets still. And I think because of what YouTube has done to us and TikTok has now further done onto us, you're looking at most 10, 15 minutes, bite-sized pieces. Notice the way we are even talking now. We're talking in a bit of a hurry. Actually, we should be talking a lot slower.
With a couple of classes.
With a couple of years. But we're not. We're just in a hurry. We're in perpetual hurry. But what we do believe in, that generative AI has a lot of power to do, is it can probably answer your questions 24/7 if you allow it to generate based on the merits of that area and the question, which is what we are toying with right now. So a bit of both. You need two approaches to it.
And for a company, I mean, a lot of companies are asking about, we need to be in the generative AI game, we need to be in the AGI game, and so on and so forth, right? And I'm sure you're getting calls to say, hey, help us to transition ourselves in there. So if you were to advise a CEO who's thinking, I need to look at my products to be AI, the way I engage my employees, the way I engage my customers, or even optimize my operations, what sort of advice would you impart to a leader of an organization to say, hey, how do you get into the game? But not just that, how do you win in this game?
So, major issues here. The first is the traditional way organizations are set up and how they pay their employees. And a lot of that is based on job descriptions and salary pegging and job evaluations. So to a lot of people, this is what you pay me to do. Why are you asking more of me? But the reality is this is what's needed now. And so we see a space between jobs and roles. And we see that role as expanding and contracting depending on what the situation is. Now that space where that role is probably where that AI is going to help very quickly. So this is the first. The second is that attitude towards it. So you need to be able to differentiate between decision making in your job and decision taking in your role. You are paid because you have a certain degree of competence in that job. So basically, you're certified, you are actually trusted, you're qualified, whatever the case might be, and someone's led you there to actually do a specific piece of work for which there's probably known outcomes. No need to get all wrapped up and keep checking, right? But in the space of the role, it's unlikely that it's yours and yours only, and you're going to have to take decisions with who you work with together. That's where the uncomfortable collaborative piece comes in. And that duality is now problematic for CEOs because you are now transferring the power of judgment and you are asking AI to support that, when actually everything on the books now, depending on which books you read now on AI, is countermanding that, which means it hallucinates, it might lead you there, the trustworthiness, so on and so forth. So there is a bit of a dilemma right now in the rush into the AI space without considering carefully whether the organization is role ready for it. And that shift is a shift that we make in the individual.
And let's talk about the shifts in individuals that you make, right? How do you help them to get to that? I know you talk about mindset, behaviors, and so on and so forth, but how does that shift actually happen?
Okay.
That enables that adaptation and that adoption, and ultimately is the acceptance of that change and driving it, right? The augmentation of it.
So years ago, I had a lot of privileged time with divers, clearance divers, and the Australians in particular, and they still have that motto. They had this 3-word motto for difficult things, and when you dive, it's difficult. Overcome, improvise, and adapt. I apply those 3 rules. If you're not prepared to overcome your situation, you're going nowhere. So that's that resilience you see in all of us, right? So you'll find that in today's climate where, mental wellness is being questioned, stress is building up, burnout rates are, I'm sorry, they're glorified. I can't deal with that. I don't know why they're glorified. But when it builds up, are you willing to overcome? And that's a lot to do with the individual, the self-awareness. Improvise, are you willing to be flexible? Which means that do you have a range of behaviors? And Roshan, you guys do a lot of leadership work, right? Are you willing to consider things this way and that way? Do you know enough of yourself? Do you have exercise sense, self-control? Do you have all that EQ stuff, which you can actually build up? And the third is when you get to adapt. And adapt is actually, in our definition, only a function of 2 things: the ability to read a situation and the ability to read the people in the situation. And that's straight down the line the work we do. So you don't get to adapt unless you're willing to overcome and improvise, because if not, it'd just be another training course and you cannot internalize it enough. But once you're ready to overcome and improvise, you're able to then learn how to read the situation and the people in the situation.
Oh, sounds like really exciting work that you do.
It is. Well, it keeps us going, and it's been giving good results because I think people are ready for it now. Especially, and I want to make another point here, because the rate of change, the technological rate of change, is just overwhelming for all of us, and we feel that we're getting left behind unless we catch up a little. And a lot of that work is self-work.
And self-work meaning
Yeah.
the stuff we do.
Yeah, not. I'm sorry, and I don't mean to take a dig at HR again. It's not HR creating a series of workshops for you. You actually need to go in search of it and be prepared to face up and get into it.
And many organizations, I guess, struggle with different employees. You've got the guys who are saying, I'm ready and I'm going, or they're already gone, right? I mean, essentially to find these new things and so on. And the guys behind who's like, wait lah, are waiting for the instructions, waiting for that movement. How do you get them to be one cohesive unit to move forward together? Because that's always been the struggle for many leaders, right?
It's actually an idealized picture of your organization, including the military. I mean, if you take the military, for which I've spent half my career, you find that a lot of money has gone into preparing people to be socialized in those norms, and selecting those who actually socialize better.
Right.
So we train everyone and we select later. In organizations, we select them first and then we train a handful. So it's a completely different model. So you're not going to be able to get everyone to do that. So what are the ratios? So as transformation consultants, we say, when you ask for a CEO, can you help? We need to accelerate transformation. We study your organization for a while, and then we kind of come to a general conclusion that you probably have some interested people, 2, a group that's largely uninterested, disinterested for whatever reason, and some of it is all this quiet quitting. And we start to look at the middle, how big that middle group is. And if the middle group is somewhere wedged between the 20th percentile to the 80th percentile, you have 60% of people to play with. You try to get to half. The idea here is to get execution going. You move from the first group and widen that first group, rather than try to work with that last group and go into all the
I see.
psychosocial factors as to why people don't want to do what they want to do. Whole reason. But here comes the other problem. No one changes, as far as we know, simply on their goodwill. So in the context of an organization, you have to tweak the performance management system. And this is where we do face quite a bit of pushback because there are some very formed norms as to who is actually going to get promoted, who is not, who's qualified, who is less. So this is another whole paradigm which is not opened up quite so yet. We've just stumbled on it. The overemphasis on qualifications at point of recruitment as substitute for skills, which now we need to probably turn on its head to say skills are the starting point and your progression is based on abilities. So this jump from qualifications to abilities is a very difficult one to make. There's an uncomfortable intermediate layer called skills. So I think we are the skills economy, and that immediately should put a smile to some of the older colleagues around us, because you never give up your skills and your abilities, even if you choose not to go back to school. I know many good people without first degrees who are doing wonderfully well at work, as you would as well. So this is another thing that we see.
And so, I mean, again, you rightly pointed out HR has control somewhat on the structure,
Yes.
which includes policies,
Yes.
performance management, and so on culture, which is all the little rituals that drives ultimately your experiences and so on. And so, to some extent, there needs to be a transition that happens to the HR community, right? In terms of as organizations transition. So, I mean, I have a perspective on it, where I think at some point that function may disappear. But what's your perspective on that as a function, the HR function, where they need to evolve to? I'm getting some sense that there needs to be some significant evolution in that the function as it exists today.
So no disrespect to a lot of good HR work that has happened, a lot of HR thinking, like for example, stakeholder management and all that. And HR needing to get to the table. In our years of doing transformation work, we have never seen HR at the board table. We have never, period. There's never been a single conversation, as far as I've facilitated years and years of this being government and commercials for more than a decade. Question as to how will our people take it. In fact, it is an afterthought. So that's the first. The second is, I think, given the tremendous changes we are seeing, HR would probably need to consider getting back into its solid specialization, which means there are specialist functions with the human resource group that only they can do, and there may be governance around it, just like accounting is or finance is, that only HR knows how to handle. However, the HR function seems to have hyped up itself quite comfortably in the last couple of years, and I don't mean this as a criticism, just an observation, into a profession. So now you have a whole group of good people who are professionals wondering why they may not be plugged into the real stuff. And I find that a little disconcerting at times when, as a profession, you seem to have a ready answer to what that solution set ought to be. But in reality, HR actually needs to map the situation better than anyone else.
Right.
So you take L&D, for example. I don't think there's room for L&D in a HR function. There's no need for L&D. It's actually available on a digital platform.
Yeah.
Especially with
generative AI.
That's generative AI. That's where you're going. Do you need coaches and mentors? Yes, but everyone is a coach and mentor. So the ultimate issue in change is the people problem. Whose is it? It cannot be HR's. It's line, it's functional leaders. It's because leaders at the top of the organization, C-suite, C-minuses, they bear responsibility to some extent, accountability for results, and it's all in people. So that's really where a little bit of disjoint is, and it's starting to show now. Of course, there's been some very harsh comments passed on HR as well, if you read LinkedIn. But I think some of that is worth noting. But a lot of that also goes back to the need to reset HR. And I think that's really good work that needs to happen in the next couple of years.
Fascinating. And I think we're going to see that over the next 10, 15 years. As we've seen how the marketing function has moved from a creative function to a completely analytical function.
That's right.
I think that there's some transition that's going to be happening in that function. So we'll have to kind of hold our horses on that and have a look at that. And I want to close out with a quick question. I mean, there's a lot of our listeners who are young folks. Very interested in being entrepreneurs, building an organization from scratch, potentially to transform the world and change things. And, what should they be thinking of as they start venturing into the world of business or of solving problems, essentially, as they kickstart the organization with all the changes technology, pace of change, hiring. There's a fear now. Should I even hire people, or should I just build robots and AI to manage my processes and so on and so forth? What are some advice you can give to our younger people exploring, getting into the world of business, or getting into the space of entrepreneurship?
So this one is very interesting. I just ran a workshop for middles, and I got asked this question actually quite like this by someone who's young. What would be your idea around innovation and how young people can actually lead innovation in organization? I say it's very simple. You've heard of Amy Edmondson's concept on psychological safety. I do not think it applies in where we work as much as it does in, say, the US. I actually like to flip it on its head and say psychological fear. To be fair to Amy, her idea of teaming is really very good. But I think to answer the question, a lot of us have been schooled, socialized into believing that we would fail. And if we fail, we ought to be fearful of that failure. So the fear of missing out, fear of losing out. And I come from Singapore, it's quite rampant there actually. So yes, kiasuism, right? So the fact of the matter is very simple. How do you then start to deal with your psychological fears based on your psychological needs, based on your propensity to overread the situation, to fear that this will not turn out well? And a lot of autobiographies by startups and all that have said you will fail and fail and fail until you get to a point where you will start to succeed. So I think we need to, again, I go back to overcome, to improvise, and then you start to adapt. You need to overcome that sense of, that latent sense, that subconscious failure. What will my parents say if this doesn't work out in a year? What will they say if this $10,000 didn't work out that way? Or what would my friends say if I took a gap year? So it starts there. Actually, you could do a correlation with some of the behaviors we're seeing in the university. So I think there's a huge world out there for young people, and the word is innovate, 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 and never stop.
Fantastic. Dr. Karuna, it was a pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you.
We've been speaking to Dr. Karuna Ramanathan from Change Leader here on the Leaderonomics Show.
Thank you very much.